Greetings, drawers. Today we will begin our discussion of value as it relates to the figure and drawing figures. Alright, if you're unfamiliar with my take on value or the terms that I use and want a bit of a refresher, you can check out my introduction to value video. In that video, I go over the basics of the value system, including the 1 through 9, what each one means, and there's a quick demonstration of drawing some eggs in that. They kind of sort of go over most of the major components of that. This lecture, though, will focus on the first sort of component of value, which is separating the lights and the darks. Okay, so as many of you probably already know, I think I've mentioned in the past, I tend to, or I choose to divide the drawing into 3 phases, right? So I happen to think that 3 is the answer to most problems. And so for me, I divide it into 3 phases. The first phase is a structural phase. The second is a massing phase, and the third phase is a final details phase. Now, in that structural phase, or the first one, I describe it like this all the time. This is the physical description, right? In the structural phase, we're saying where everything is going to be in the drawing, right? This bit is going to be here, this bit is going to be over here, this bit is going to be down here, right? You'll frequently hear people call that the scaffolding phase. In certain disciplines, people talk about doing a lay-in, right? It's when you establish all of the stuff. For me, the second phase of the drawing is the massing phase, right? It's when we give volume to the figures, right? Because when they're like this, they could just simply be cardboard cutouts, right? Or we could throw some cross contours on them as we did previously, and that'll help give us the illusion of space, right? But it isn't until we start to add tone that we really see true volume, right? And so I describe the massing phase like this. So the scaffolding phase looks like this, and then the massing phase looks like that. All right, and then the final, the third phase is those details. All right, and that's really just at the end. And details doesn't mean like nitpicky little details, like like if you're drawing a little tiny figure, eyes, ears, nose, mouth, because the eye has a structure, right? It has mass. And then it would also need to be kind of finished. The details are crisping up edges, right? So as we're kind of like, leaving our edge might be a little bit flexible till the end of the drawing because we're uncertain whether we want it here or there. So for me, the details phase is when we go and crisp things up. We make sure that our tones are all even in the places that we want to. We maybe add some of those little stylistic kind of like extra little nuggets that make a drawing look so good. Right, that's really what I see as the final phase, and that is the shortest of those phases. Right, so those phases, just because I'm saying that there are 3 phases, they're not 3 equal parts. Right, so if you read a book and it has 3 parts to the book, or it's only 3 chapters or whatever, each section of the book isn't 333 pages. Right, so the first section is as long as it needs to be. The second section is as long as it needs to be, and then the ultimate the resolution might be fairly small. That final bit where you pull it all together. I feel that the structural phase, a lot of times in class we work in the classes that I normally teach. We can usually get in 5 20-minute blocks. Right, so in those 5 20s, I usually say that the first 2 blocks are the scaffolding phase, and they end with the separation of the light and the dark, which is what transitions. I'm going to speak about that, and that is what transitions us into the massing phase. And then the next 2 are definitely all massing out, and most of the last 20 is also massing out, and there's maybe 5-10 minutes for the final details phase. All right, so I see the massing phase as the largest of the 3. Right, and as I just mentioned, it starts with the separation of the light and the dark. And what that looks like for us, as I'm going to demonstrate in today's lecture, which is on the core shadow line and the separation of light and dark, right, is the placing of the core shadow line. right? So we're going to place the core shadow line on as if it is a contour line in its own right, So we're going to draw it in as a line. And that line is going to separate all the things that are in the light from all the things that are in the dark. Right? So in a studio drawing, we always want to have a clear sense of what's in the light and what's in the dark. Now when we're outside, right, when you're outside, we have one clear light source outside all the time. It's the sun. If it's at night, it's the moon. Right? One big clear light source. When you're in a room where maybe there are multiple light sources, or if you're in some kind of like academic institution and there's fluorescent light tubes all over, you have light bouncing all over the place all the time. And what it actually has the effect of doing is it flattens us out. Right? If you want to take a really good photograph of yourself, either set up a single light source, as we're doing with the model here, right? Set up a single light source with maybe a secondary reflective light, which is something I will do later on. But in this example, I'm just using a single light source, or go outside. Right? So the best photograph of yourself is always going to be one that's taken outside, because the arrangement of of the various angles of your face are all being determined by that single light source, right? Right. So, so as I was saying, the transition from the scaffolding phase or the structural phase, the scaffolding phase to the massing phase is when we separate the light and the dark. And what you're going to see in this demonstration is that we're going to go from something where we're having to use our brain to see what we're representing, to just simply seeing it, or as I like to say, actually feeling it. Right? So I feel like the scaffolding phase it's all up here, and as we make that transition, we move to interpreting in a more sort of physical sense, or interpreting the drawing from here. Okay. All right. So let's get started. We'll be again working with Jennifer today, and let's just jump right in. So, like all the drawings, right? I'm doing a demo, so I'm gonna put it right here in the center. Right? I'm gonna start with a circular form, right, representing my rib cage here. Right? A little crazy there. I made that a little bit bigger than I wanted, so I'm gonna bring it down. And she's sort of twisting off to the side, so we got to get that initial kind of gesture. Right? I can kind of, there we go. That kind of going over a little bit more. Right? It's gonna curve around here and come down. The rib cage and the pelvis are kind of lined up here on this side. And maybe a little bit less even. And that pelvic form sits up here. Hips are shooting way out to the side. Doing a kind of quick measure there. Right. Shoulders go up, something like this. Right. Can measure that. Right. Aces points, something like this. Right. So they kind of having them go like that. Right. So the groin comes down and sits something about here. So notice I'm just kind of just gesture drawing this in at this point in time. Pit of my neck actually maybe needs to go over a little bit more. And this kind of comes down there. Okay. All right, holding that knitting needle up again. Side of her head sits in between the bottom of the groin and her farthest point of her center line. So that's going to put the side of her head kind of about here. All right. And the other side sits kind of about here. Right. Her chin, right, kind of crosses over this line, goes to about there. Right, and that's going to put our head something angle there. Just gonna put our head going. So I'm having a little bit of a problem with this pencil. I feel like there's a little sort of hard spot in there. Which sort of happens sort of sometimes. Angle down here, grab her shoulder, which sits kind of about there. That's maybe actually a little too far over because I'm kind of trying to decide what I want to do with that. I think that hand, as I'm looking at that there, that hand might be a little bit kind of in the way there. And then this other arm is going to kind of come out something like this. And we'll have a hand up here, and our elbow's probably going to sit sort of something down, kind of like that. All right, so let's now remember that as I've been sort of moving you through this sort of this course in these various videos, I'm building up a systematic approach to a drawing. So everything is the same. So you know, we start with a kind of loose gesture. Because we're going to be doing a little bit more, I'm keeping the gesture pretty light. But as far as all of the scaffolding phases, it's going to be the same for every drawing. Right? It's not gonna change, right? So next thing you know we need to do is we need to take some measurements. So I'm gonna go 1, 2, 3.5, right? So 1. The second one is going to come down to where it'll actually sit at the bottom of the breast. I'm just going to make a little mark there. And then the other one comes down to where the bottom of her, sort of the belly form sits, which is right about there. And then there's about a half a head. So I just measured those out, and those work fine. All right, do a separate one. I'm going to measure here to here. So let's do about there, and about there. So that looks good. That looks good to me, right? So now I'm going to take that large comparative measurement, right? Her left leg is her dominant leg, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plot where her heel is. Now in this pose, it's kind of difficult to see where that heel is. So I have a couple of different choices. Should be wearing my glasses. I could go to the ankle, or I could just go to where I think the heel is and then add the toes. I think that's what I'm going to do so I stay consistent, right? So thumb here, right? Tip of the needle is up here. Okay, and that goes to right about there. So that's going to put her foot, that heel, where I think her heel is going to sit about there. All right? I'm going to do it again using the whole foot, though, right? Just to kind of get that so I can just kind of verify that. And that one, I'm going to right where the groin is. Right? So that'll give me that kind of the bottom of her foot will go to right about there. Right? So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plot where that is. Right? So remember, the balance of our figure, right? The balance of the figure is, this is my definition. It's the relationship between the skull and the heels. Right? So if you throw your skull forward, your body will be out of balance and you'll start running, or you'll fall over. Or you'll have to use something to counterbalance that, right? So you could be out of balance, leaning up against a wall. You could also be out of balance, but holding a really heavy weight in one hand, right? So, or you could have a large tail that allows you to run, so that you can use your mouth exclusively for hunting. Okay, so I have her heel right in the center of her head, right here. And so that's where that is, okay? And that's actually lined up perfect. So that gives me that. Mm-hmm. So now I'm going to go ahead and draw that other leg. Now I got the other one. I'm gonna work down the sort of, the sort of gesture of this here. I can kind of measure this stuff out afterwards, but this will come down to something like this. Right? And then, because I'm just sort of gesture drawing out here, we're going to have this one's going to cut in front of that one, right? Kind of like this coming here, then this kind of bulges out a little bit and then comes in something like this, right? And then we get this other leg kind of coming back, right? So there's sort of that thing right there, right? And that already feels right to me. Mm-hmm. This is most of my sort of scaffolding phase. I'm gonna sort of call this there, right? I'm gonna take a short break, and when we come back, right, we're going to transition from our scaffolding into our massing, right? And I will show you what that looks like. Be back in a few. All right, I'm back. I'm going to switch my pencil here because that previous pencil was giving me a hard time the whole time, so hopefully this one will work a little bit better for me. All right, as you can also see, I actually adjusted the lights a little bit in here so I can see a little bit better. One of the things that you're going to notice as I'm doing this is that I'm going to do a lot of squinting, right? So if you see me sort of making squinty eyes, don't laugh at me too much. Believe it or not, squinting is a really helpful tool to allow you to see tones better. Right? So when we squint, we remove all those distracting details that we might see. So squinting can allow you to assess color a little bit better. Squinting can allow you to assess tone better. And tone is what we're specifically looking at here. Right? So as you remember from our previous in that previous video when I talked about the different parts of the tone, there's the things that are in the light and there's the things that are in the dark. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to separate the light from the dark. Now why this is particularly important is that it will help you to avoid what I call camouflage. Right, so if you think about camouflage, right? So camouflage, when people are wearing camouflage, hunters or soldiers or hipsters or whatever that are wearing camouflage, what camouflage actually is doing is it sets up a confusing set of patterns that we can't easily read forms. So if you're in the woods and you have light coming through the trees and you have dark areas and light areas and different colors and all of these kinds of things, it can actually make it kind of difficult to read a form. Now in a drawing, we're not looking for camouflage, we're not looking to hide our figures in the space, but you can inadvertently do that by having tones that are in the light range in the dark areas. So things that are in the dark need to stay in the dark. They need to be combinations of 7, 8s, and 9s, although occasionally with reflected light, you can kind of make it a little bit brighter, but you don't want to have 2s and 3s in your dark area because they're going to confuse the form and they're going to confuse the eye. Right? As a general rule, or you'll sometimes hear people say this, and I hope I don't botch this, right? Your darkest light needs to be lighter than your lightest. Oh wait, no, I did. Hold on, I gotta rephrase that. All right, let me try that again. Right? Your darkest light is lighter than your lightest dark, or your lightest shadow is darker than your darkest light. Right? I know it's really sort of confusing and hard to say. See, I jumble it up in my head. It sounds like a tongue twister. But what that's basically saying is that all of the things that are in the dark are one set of tones, and all of the things that are in the light are a separate set of tones, right? And you don't want to confuse the two of them, right? And so even the darkest thing that's in the light is still lighter than all the stuff that's in the dark. Now, one of the things that we can do in our drawing to set that up is to very early on, when we start doing tone work, right? So you hear people like a lot of times they want to jump into doing the quote shadows, right? But what I do is I like to separate the light from the dark and just clearly understand in my drawing which things are in the light and which things are in the dark, right? Which things are Jedi, which things are Sith, which ones are good guys, which ones are bad guys, right? What's in the light, what's in the dark, right? And to not allow them to mix, right? Because it'll produce something that is camouflaged and therefore confusing, right? So how do we do that, right? Right, so here we are looking at this figure here, and since we're still in this scaffolding phase, right? There's nothing that really is telling us all that much about this this figure, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to do a simple tone analysis, all right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate all the things that are. I'm going to start all the way up here at the top, right, with this little sort of chunk of hair here. Right? And one of the other things too is that putting this in will actually help you to see these tones better, right? So I look here, this kind of comes around, it's got a little bit of kind of texture to it here, right? Comes down something like this, right? Then there's a little bit of kind of a little nook of light there that comes across, right? It's kind of, it's hard to realize, but these, even though her hair is very dark, it's still, we're not assessing the color of her skin versus the color of her hair. What we're doing is we're assessing the things that are in the light versus the things that are not in the light. Right? So then this kind of comes over something like this. Right? Then her forehead is going to come down like this. Right? And following some of those rules, right? It actually curves a little bit something like this. Right? Then hits her brow line. Right? And kind of comes over something like this. Right? Before kind of coming down. We're not going to get too into all of this stuff here, so I'm just going to sort of do that. All right, squint a little bit more. Okay, see a little bit what's kind of going on there. All right, and then comes up, right, into that mask, right? It goes like this, right, and then it comes down and it goes up, right? Because parts of her nose are then somewhat exposed, right? And then this comes down something like this. This comes something like that. I want that to kind of come over something here, and then it's kind of coming down something like this. Okay. I'm going to skip her arm. I'll come back up and around and do the arm, right? Down the sternocleidomastoid, it's going to come down something like this, right? And then there's a little bit of sort of light that's kind of coming up something here, and this part is actually connecting to that. Right? This goes like this, and it actually has a little kind of sliver that goes over before coming back up and coming over and sort of hitting this chin, and it sort of has a little sort of connected part that I kind of missed there. Right? There's a little bit of sort of stuff going on in the shoulder. We can kind of come back to that. Right? Now over here, it might be kind of a little bit kind of, you don't necessarily have to do it all, like start at the top and just go all the way down. Right? Sometimes it's helpful to kind of jump around. So here I'm going to jump down to here and go to the side of the breast here. Right? And then it actually kind of comes then under here. Right, and oops, I could have been a little bit more sophisticated with that one. Right, so, because this is actually a little bit of a cast shadow here, right, and then that kind of comes around sort of the breast, something like this, right, and then so this is actually coming up, something like this. And then on the breast, it actually goes down and goes a little bit like that, and bumps over here. All right, now over here, these are all sort of measurable, sort of, it curves back a little bit, something like that. And then it curves up to about here, right? Picks up something like this, right? And then it comes down. And what we're actually here seeing, right? You don't necessarily have to know all of the anatomy, but this is her bicep. Right? And then down here we would have another sort of line, right, to represent that. And then this is her tricep. Right? So, and that is coming up something like this. Right? And now I can come back in. Right? And go something like that. Right? Now, one of the things when you're doing the core shadow and you're watching the model as the model moves around and breathes and kind of comes in and out and various sort of times, you want to look for the parts that are, what I would call the coolest parts. All right, when the core shadow is most interesting, when she completely exhales, all right, it might flatten out. All right. And then at other points when she kind of, when she inhales maybe, right? So I always talk about inhalation and exhalation, right? So when we inhale, when she inhales a little bit, the core shadow does like something that's more visually dynamic or more visually interesting, right? So that's what I'm sort of looking at here, right? I like the way this is right now because it's capturing a certain sort of portion here, right? So I'm going to put her navel in kind of like here, right? Because I have this section here, right? It's kind of, actually it's sort of a little bit kind of, all kinds of pencil problems today, right? It kind of comes down something like this. I squint my eyes as I sort of look around, right? Sort of see this kind of coming up something like that. Right? Another section coming sort of back here. Right? Notice how I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. I don't like to just do it all, exactly the same. Right? I happen to feel that the core shadow is actually this is a place for design, right? And in actuality, you have the ability, because the model is breathing, right? Because the model is breathing, right? This is a place where we can maybe take a few luxuries, have a little bit of sort of artistic license, right? Choose. We're doing a drawing from life, but we have the opportunity to choose the parts that are maybe more or less visually interesting to us. Right? So, you are a designer. Right? You're a figurative designer. You don't have to just simply, photocopy. Right? That's why they invented cameras. Cameras photocopy. Right? Super phenomenal, wonderful things. Love cameras, right? But cameras can't design. Right? They can't do art. So, this has a little kind of squiggle as it kind of goes up into our sort of ACES point there. it comes down. So now pick up this section here. Right now I'm going to come down here. Big sort of curvature as it kind of comes up to something like that. All right. I think before I go down to the legs, and I think I'm going to come down and clean up a little bit of this here. So we're going to bring this kind of arm out here. All right, so over here, got this little elbow sort of nook, right, and then this is actually coming down, and actually this whole section is going to, on her hand. Right, so on her hand, I could get into looking at all of the individual little fingers in there. Right, the whole sort of thumb section here is all in darkness. This is actually sort of coming under here, but I'm going to kind of simplify these to something kind of up here, down something like this. Right, picks up. I don't like the outer shape of this, so I'm going to clean that up a little bit here. Here's my hand position. Cleaner. You notice that I do a soft edge on all of these, right? So when it comes to doing the core shadow, right, I like the core shadow to have a nice soft edge. Come back and kind of reinforce some of this. Bringing the darkness to the edge. Now your core shadow doesn't necessarily have to, exactly be the tone that the finished version would be. All right, what do I mean by that? All right? What I mean by that is all we're doing in this initial stage is separating the light from the dark. Right? We're separating the light from the dark. We're not making it the actual tone that it is. Right? This is something to help us to see this form better so that we can go in and add to it. So in the initial phase, it should still be light. Because you might be saying, like, well, Eric, that looks like maybe that's like a 4. And when I'm looking at the model, that's clearly like a 7. But right now, it's just the separation. That's all we're kind of going for in this initial sort of phase. All right? So this whole second leg is all in the darkness. I'm just going to go down, and I'm going to use this. I'm going to take a quick measuring here to establish where that top of that knee is. Just on your head here. All right, so you can see once you kind of get going, right, you can use the the shadows are additional things that we can be measuring off of. Right, so I'm going from the so you might sometimes look at like say like, well, what's he measuring from? That doesn't even look like anything. So this just sort of comes in, and then our knee. On this right now where it is, I'm just gonna it kind of does something like this. Right, it's kind of like a little kind of squiggle. Right, and then this is gonna kind of come up a little bit, right, and go over. Right, and then it's gonna come down, something like this. Right, and what that line right there is showing me is that I feel like my leg is a little bit too wide. Right? So that helps me to see that. So now I can use that kind of information to make this calf a little bit smaller. Right? And this isn't going to matter because I'm actually going to send all of this into, because this is all in the darkness. All right, so see that? And then on this other side, right, I have a little bit of kind of light kind of coming through here. And again, sort of, it's from the kind of the middle of that knee, right? And then it kind of bumps around a little bit, right? And then this leg is actually kind of coming in a little bit more. And then this one is actually something like that. Oops. And then what actually happens here is these two legs actually kind of merge together, right? And if you're squinting and looking, you actually really can't see without really looking, right, that there is any differentiation between them, right? So, all right, over to this foot then, over into here. And this is actually some cast shadow over here. Right, on this ankle, right, we come down. I really want to kind of get into doing all these little toes here. Right? Yeah. But we'll just put those ones on there. Right? Looking at that cast shadow then, right? It comes off of the bottom of where her heel should be. And we can sort of measure that. It goes down, goes up, right? And it sort of moves off, right? And over here, and kind of curves around a little bit. We're picking up a little bit of it there, right? And it kind of curves up and then kind of goes off. So let's. So in terms of the light and the dark, right? I'm going to add a little bit of tone to the background to sort of get this drawing to pop a little bit more. So what I'm going to do, clean up that edge a little bit, sort of define that a little bit more. right, so, someone's actually cast shadow right here. So there you have it. That is a tonal separation. Right? This would be the first phase in setting up a fully toned drawing, which is where we're going to be going next. All right. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you next week.